There's a small group of people who are so good at this that they can make as much money as a well-heeled lobbyist downtown. Who do you want to take advice from?
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, the home of campaign tech innovation on the right. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, you are joining in on a conversation with entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. Our guest today is Alex Keeney, founder of Spangled Gamblers, a podcast and website about the world of political prediction markets. Founded in 2018, it's the hub for the political gambling community online. In today's episode, you'll learn about this controversial world of betting on politics, how predictors make their decisions, and how political professionals might derive insights from these markets. Before we dive in, I want to make something very obvious. We usually offer a lot of professional advice on this show, but not today. Political prediction markets involve real risk, and none of what we discuss today should be considered financial advice. Alex, give us the crash course on political betting markets. Is it legal and where do people go to do it?
Right now, there are a number of places on the internet in varying regulatory standing with the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. The biggest, which probably most of your audience is already aware of, is called PredictIt. They have been operating, I think, since about 2014, and that's where your traditional election betting happens. If the audience wants to go a little bit deeper, there's a company out of New York City that has a bunch of Silicon Valley funny money that's trying to break into the space called Kalshi. They're a little bit different. And then the ones who are kind of woke to crypto have some other options, but they're in a more nefarious regulatory environment if they want to predict on those exchanges.
What are the kind of things that people are betting on or making predictions on?
Sure. So, sports betting is and stocks are kind of what most people know. So, elections are the obvious thing this time of year. They're pretty liquid, millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars wash through those marketplaces. But for example, like I started my career on the Hill. So what I like to bet on is will such and such very boring title of very boring bill be included in Chuck Schumer's final draft? Or, will Joe Biden talk about this specific policy during the State of the Union? So there are hundreds of different opportunities. They're constantly being updated. It's really up to you. It's in the artist's eye, my friend.
Yeah. And, one of the reasons that it is controversial, I think it's fair to say, is because it is under this regulatory framework where people are like, is it an equity like stocks or is it a commodity? And, I think you made this point on your podcast at some point. But if we are able to speculate on the price of pork belly, whatever that is, for 12 months from now, then we ought to be able to put money down for predictions on what's going to happen in politics.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is Spangled Gamblers? Like, we're kind of the lobby bar for the people who are really good at this and the people who are trying to figure it out. And there's inherent value to sort of understanding who the world's premier political predictors are, because they tend to be ahead of like what's in your inbox in the morning from Jake Sherman or Playbook or whatever it may be. Now, like, as for the business of betting itself, this country has kind of a fraught relationship with that historically. But if you look at like the UK, for example, I don't think anyone's accusing degens who are, laying 100 pounds of risk on Liz Truss of swinging elections. So right. I sort of rule that out.
Listeners might know that I've done a lot of work in Australia, and political gambling, as with all forms of gambling, is very much alive and well there. And there was a market, I think, in I guess it would have been the 2016 federal elections, where there's the sort of top political commentator. What color tie is he going to wear? And he became aware of this market and proceeded to wear every single tie color through the night's coverage. So he really messed up that market, and I think they had to pay out. So it is happening all over the world. So let's dig into how is you mentioned sort of some political pundits that people might be reading coverage from every morning. How is political gambling different from punditry and other types of political analysis?
Well, there's a built-in accountability device, right? So like I think a lot of cable news media, a lot of print media at this point is kind of people seeing what they want to see in the world and, reporting to reinforce a point of view. I mean, it's like a good marketing strategy, right? Like everyone wants to hear Tucker or whoever the new Rachel Maddow is kind of reassure them at night. But the punditry of markets it's no different from like the Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg. I mean, it's like if you're wrong, you sort of pay a price. So betting markets do two things, in my opinion, that maybe aren't as obvious. One, they're a great detector for the urgency of a story. Every election, every regulatory action is sort of sold as being urgent because how else would it happen if it wasn't urgent? But like if you look at betting markets, they'll give you a pretty good gauge of what is actually happening. But they're also a great accountability device. I mean, the hacky term is bullshit detectors, because if you're wrong, you will pay a price. And of course, the incentives are there to be right because you can gain from being ahead of the press, being ahead of the marketplace, and really keeping your eye on the ball the way that the incentive structure for traditional media doesn't really reward.
Yeah, it would be like if the talking heads on TV had to have some sort of almost like baseball level stats of how many times they've been wrong, how many times they've been right, even real accountability like that.
Yeah. I mean, and by the way, that might not be for everyone. Like some people want to watch Hallmark movies. Some people want to be reassured that they're right and the world is wrong. Some people want to know what's true, so it's not for everybody. If you want to know what's true, it's probably for you. If you don't care, then that's fine.
So what are some of the public signals or data points that a bettor might look at to inform his or her positions? I mean, I'm sure there are some obvious ones to our listeners, but I'd like to hear about those as well as some that may not be so obvious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the really, really elite strata of political predictors, political bettors are paying attention to all the same stuff people downtown are paying attention to. They care about polls. They care about how much money, where it's been spent, what is this super PAC that just appeared on paper. But they're also pretty dialed into qualitative signals like body language, tone of voice. We at Star Spangled Gamblers philosophically believe it's very important to pay attention to pop culture and technology too. Contrary to what a lot of people, for example, in Washington, D.C. might think, America, like politics is responsive to culture and markets and technology. So spotting signals in those places first and to try and decide how they might inform our politics is a valuable betting strategy. But I think it's just more, it's the information, but it's also what are people doing with this information? Because at the end of the day, like for us to be legitimate with our users, we have to find insights that are market beating in that information versus, again, sort of producing boring copy that reiterates why our side might win or lose because it makes us feel good. So it's what we don't suffer for lack of information in the modern world. We suffer for what to do with it. So we're just doing something different with it and actually making projections that we're financially accountable for.
You sort of already alluded to this about like being a good filter for urgency. How are different events, like from something macro like the economy and inflation to something micro like a campaign scandal, how do those events impact the betting markets?
In a diversity of ways, Eric. Okay, so first of all, everyone listening to this podcast probably watched John Fetterman's somewhat disastrous interview last week on NBC. Last week, as of recording date.
Yeah, how could you not? Fair to say?
Right. So that would be like one micro example of a small event that had a profound effect on betting markets. So once that thing aired, first of all, Fetterman's odds of winning his race crashed, below 50% for the first time. Like Dem pricing globally, small g globally, went down across exchanges. So that would be like a small event that people interpolated to have sort of profound consequences. But there are other indicators out there. Gas prices, odds for Dems to hold the Senate tend to move with gas prices. That seems to be kind of a sticky metric for when voters get triggered enough to turn on opinion polls and such. So there's there are a lot of little sticks and stones out there, but that's what comes to mind quickly.
Yeah, that raises another really interesting point about this data that we're seeing in the political prediction markets, which is polling is a lagging indicator, right? So when you see a poll, it was out in the field maybe a week ago for 5 days. And so something like a prediction mark is able to price in that NBC News Fetterman interview
Right.
instantly. I think it would be helpful to our listeners to give us a context of who, not who, but when you're talking about like the top of the top in political gamblers, what kind of volume are we looking at? How much money is involved there?
I would say that your top echelon is making $100,000 to $300,000 a year just beating markets on what's next.
So it's I mean, conceivably people could make it a full-time job if they were really good and successful at it.
Yeah, and there's a number of people who do. So, like, again, if you think about it in like Washington, D.C. context, there's a small group of people who are so good at this that they can make as much money as kind of a well-heeled lobbyist downtown. So who do you want to take advice from, you know?
I'm just really fascinated by this culture, and I want to give our listeners a better sense of it. Give us a sense of like who your listeners are, who your fans are. Are these people who are like, oh, I've worked on campaigns and now I'm doing this, or is it people who just kind of like politics and like following the news?
I would say the vast majority of successful traders that I know have almost no experience in the field of politics. And like truly come from places and occupations that you would not expect. One of the greatest traders out there is a high school vice principal in the Midwest. I know a guy who probably makes $50,000 a year trading polling averages, who is a retired Broadway lighting guy, a gaffer from Broadway, academia, pharmaceuticals, you name it. I started on DC. I'm like a Hollywood guy. I mean, it's not a political insider's business, which I think is ultimately the value. Is it's the outsiders who have the insights that the insiders sort of lag on, just maybe because they're not in the DC bubble.
Yeah, is it because we all have the access to the same data, but do you think it's the insiders are more emotional about it?
I think there's a few reasons why people in Washington miss. I think anywhere, what's the right way to say this? There's a risk for being different, right? Mm-hmm. And whether we agree on this or not, like Washington is not a town that wants to hear kind of contrarian takes and
right.
have creative ideas introduced. Like you kind of do well by fitting in here.
Well, conventional wisdom is the bread and butter of Washington.
Right. Like being likable, understanding how things work, not rocking the boat, under promise, over deliver. Like these are sort of tropes of success in Washington. But a betting market rewards the opposite, right? Like it rewards finding the thing that everyone else is missing. It rewards rocking the boat. So, there is cultural value, I think, in that.
So give us a quick snapshot. We're recording this on Tuesday, October 18th. What are the betting markets saying about the elections in a few weeks?
Oh, they're very confused. They are very confused, just like anyone else. They still rate Dems as the favorites, and I think we all understand we're talking about the Senate, but by a significantly more narrow margin than Nate Silver or even Real Clear Politics. Very, very narrow favorites. I think that they're assuming that at this point Blake Masters is done. They really like Adam Laxalt, but ironically, not really sensing danger for J.D. Vance in Ohio, even though polls maybe say that that's not the case. So, but advantage Democrats.
Got it. And but just slightly, maybe more like 55-45 rather than 70-30.
Actually, you know what? I'm checking predicted odds right now, and just this morning, the Republicans nosed above 50%. So they're definitely pricing in some more favorable motions for Republicans as we speak right now.
Got it. You're listening to the Business of Politics show. I'm speaking with Alex Keeney, co-founder of Star Spangled Gamblers. Alex, I want to shift gears now away from political gambling as a space and more to what you're working on with SSG, Star Spangled Gamblers. There's a saying that goes, when a gold rush is on, you want to be the person selling shovels, right? And
Right.
I think that's exactly what you're doing in this political prediction market space. Talk to us a little bit about how you're capitalizing on this expanding market.
Well, I mean, like philosophically, I'm a person who believes in doing things for the sake of doing them. So, like, that's my first, thing is like, let's just be here. Let's be here before other people are. And like the doors that will open will please us. And to date, that's been the case. But from, like if we're talking about a VC, like an investor's deck or something, yes, we have relationships. We have affiliate relationships with all of the major exchanges so that, as they grow, we can grow with them. But the real value is in the relationships. I mean, content is such a good magnet for relationships that you can monetize, subscriptions, all of that type of stuff. So we're formally tethered to the industry through affiliate partnerships, but I think the real upside is kind of in what we're building in the soft and squishy space with content relationships and partnerships that come through that trellis.
So you have a very robust and thriving community, and one of the ways that you're tapping into that is through Patreon, which offers crowdfunding. And I really think that we're going to see a reckoning in political fundraising after this cycle, because we just saw the bottom drop out on email fundraising, on Facebook advertising. The methods that we used pretty reliably for the last 6 or 8 years are pretty much gone. So I want to get some insights from you on what political campaigns could learn from your business model, which is giving fans what they want, and how do you listen to that? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so obviously, cliche alert, people crave authenticity.
What does that mean? What does authenticity mean in this case?
Well, people have more or less the same problems. And what the internet does is, one, it gives them a way to solve problems that they couldn't before. So first rule, like, content that can solve a problem will make money. Content that can't solve a problem, it starts to get harder. But like I said, information is not hard to find, and people tend to want to get information from people they like. So if you can just sort of present yourself as the guy in the high school cafeteria full of lots of different types of people, and you can just be that guy that people say, like, oh my gosh, like, he's just like me. He thinks about the same things. He has the same problems. He talks the same way. That's a good first step. So that's maybe a more mechanical definition of authenticity, is sort of speaking and representing yourself in the same way that your target audience speaks and represents itself. I don't know, does that sell as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the core of being authentic is listening, one, yes, which is what you pointed out, and two, updating what you're saying or doing based on what you're hearing.
Yeah.
And those are the two hallmarks of authenticity. It's not, it's just sort of bandied about as you got to be authentic. But when it comes to how do I actually do that, those are the two things. And I think you described it perfectly.
Yeah, content's a great feedback device, because the instant you post it, you'll start getting feedback, and you'll sort of be able to anticipate when you have to duck a rotten tomato, and when the crowd will applaud. And then ultimately the question you have to answer is just like, how do I get more people into the auditorium? Because at some point you have to make money, and, giving stuff away for free is a hard business to be in. But
what are you talking about?
Yeah. Right. But it's getting easier and easier to turn that into actual money. So that's the thing people should see as the upside, I think.
So I think the model for campaigns, if I can just put a dot on the end of this sentence, which is, campaigns have for a long time have just had this kind of monopoly of like, there's going to be an election every 2 years. You got to pick a Republican or a Democrat. And increasingly we're seeing people say, well, look, there are other ways I can get my political fix. I can donate to other candidates across the country, right? Like, I don't have to just support my local candidates. We see a lot of surrogate seeking behavior. Right. And so if I think candidates and campaigners know that authenticity is important, but it really is this mindset shift of listening to what supporters want and reacting appropriately. And
right.
And that those are the two pieces that I just see missing. People are saying, I'm running for office, and I'm not taking any feedback, any questions, or it's very clear that it's lip service. So I think if we can get more candidates and campaigns in that mindset, they can tap into more of this, what's loosely referred to as the creator economy revenue streams.
Well, okay, but I think it's important to draw a distinction, because there's what a really savvy content presence can do, and there's what a really savvy content presence can't do. So, like, here's what a great content presence can do: create an audience, own an audience, market to audience, and you can do it forever because they just like you, and you give them things that help them solve problems, help them understand the world, and give them, unique insights that no one else is providing them. Okay, that's great. But here's what it can't do. And I think this is why a lot of campaign professionals are fairly skeptical of, why should I take the risk of letting my candidate speak off the cuff and not say stupid, hacky things that everyone knows are phony and made up and designed to sort of avoid risk. Is a savvy content presence can't guarantee votes on November 8th. Like if you invest in it consistently over the course of months and years, it can guarantee votes forever. Right. But I can't tell you, it's just impossible to promise that you will have, 50% plus one on November 8th, from 0 to 1. Can't make that promise. But the investment, if you look at the people who have made the investment, the AOCs, the Trumps, the Dan Crenshaws, Ted Cruz has done a good job of it. He's not even that interesting of a person, I don't think. If you make the investment, the benefits hang around forever.
I totally agree with that. And I think one thing that campaigners and decision makers have not factored into their decision making is that the infrastructure of the internet of modern campaigning has to be always on, right? So there's this idea of like, okay, well, I dust off my campaign every 4, 6, or 2 years, depending on what office you're seeking. And, I can buy TV ads, I can pay for mail. But when you try and go digital, the doors are getting shut in your face in terms of paid options, the ability to micro-target. And so I think the writing is on the wall that you need to have this organic audience and content development. And it's going to take a little bit of work recalibrating our campaigns to that.
Right. And, you can apply a certain amount of money to that to help, to accelerate it. But there's really just no replacing persistence and kind of honesty with the people. Like if I was my dream, I don't want to climb Mount Everest. I don't want to surf that 100-foot wave in Portugal. I wish that I could find 3 politicians with like a political death wish to start. Are you familiar with The Breakfast Club?
The movie?
No. Like the hip hop podcast. It's like a morning. It's Charlemagne the God.
Oh,
like
okay.
Obama. Yeah. There should be the Breakfast Club of young Republican members of Congress talking about everything that they're not allowed to talk about. I mean, could you imagine how much audiences would want to know, like, why were the corn growers in town?
Right.
Why does a member from Texas and a member from Pennsylvania from the same party have completely opposite views on this issue that, like all the stuff that bores people and triggers them and pisses them off, like they crave an explanation for that. That is what people want. Now, can you survive the political consequences of it? I don't know. But the person, who like, am I just rambling here? Is this me sounding like a crazy person? I mean, usually when I say this to people in Washington, I can just see them getting triggered. Like, why would I do that?
What I tell people all the time is like, oh, well, what if the congressman says something stupid? And I'm like, well, you don't have a content or a social media problem, right? Yeah. Like that's an issue with your member or your candidate.
Well, but it is a real thing. I mean, because you are going to say something stupid. But there's some amount of sloppiness that the internet likes, but there's some amount of sloppiness that in politics can. Well, I mean, maybe it doesn't quite end you anymore. I mean, think about all the politicians who have hung around through scandals, and think I think the world is just more forgiving of sloppiness because of the internet in some ways.
Yeah, I think there's certainly more forgiveness, and there's a clear path for how to do that. It's just a matter of who's willing to step out and take that risk. I want to go back to the political prediction markets, and obviously, folks have listened to this show and are in general, even if they're not gambling on politics themselves, are aware that these prediction markets are out there. What are some ways that they can factor in that data to their decision making or strategy, and maybe give us a confidence level?
I mean, it's probably a good barometer if you're thinking about allocating money. I mean, I think most people in Washington are professional political gamblers in some way. I mean, they're just moving money through PACs and super PACs and stuff,
but without any consequences. right? Like no one keeps tracks of like a consultant's win-loss record.
Right. Right. But like in a way that's not really even the service that they're in. It's,
Right. Yeah.
the market has its own perverse incentives. I mean, I think if you're trying to figure out where to allocate money, it's probably a good, indication of where sharp people think races are actually competitive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I might start there, but again, I think it's a good detector for urgency in anything, whether you're following regulatory processes or legislative processes. The markets will move, and sometimes it's helpful just to see what people who have money invested in the outcomes thinks. Like, what do they think is dispositive? What do they think puts their position at risk or gives them opportunity? And we sort of make all that clear, and we kind of make it fun. That's what we do at Star Spangled Gamblers.
Right.
Is our mission is to make this relatable to kind of casual political observers, and make it fun and bring in information that other people discount.
I think one thing that is particularly useful that you mentioned earlier was filtering out signal versus noise, right? So when you're following a campaign, when you're working on a campaign, you are living and breathing it every minute of the day. And so, so-and-so who is the former mayor of this town and is a Democrat has endorsed the Republican. This is huge, right? Like if you're just following the Twitter or even political reporting, you do get this sort of breathless, this changes everything, reporting and narrative building. Whereas if you take a step back and look at the gambling markets, people are seeing that, but it's not impacting things. I think it can be a really helpful counterweight to getting some distance on the campaign and not getting caught up in the hype.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and tell you that the betting markets are crystal clear in vision and always on the nose. Sometimes they're not, but I think it's an important source of information to kind of build your own internal image of what's going on in the country, because they are pricing in things that polls in PAC data don't. They are populated by people. From my own experience, for example, I made a fair amount of money in 2021 betting against Build Back Better passing. Now, eventually, it did pass. That was a thing, but I mean, it was just looking at inflation reports, right? Like as long as this CPI is doing this, Joe Manchin is not. So there's just so many things happening in America that polls and conventional political intelligence don't measure, but betting markets are a barometer of how people are thinking about, again, finance, culture, and technology, and what their bearing is on politics. And as I've said, it is my betting philosophy that politics rides in the fourth car, rides behind all of those engines that drag it along.
Well, Alex, you keep track of a lot of campaigns. Is there another opportunity you see in the space that would make for a good startup?
Well, I am a content person, so I sort of see everything as a content problem. So take this with a grain of salt. I just think like if I was running a public affairs firm, if I was running a trade association or something like that, I think that audiences require a certain amount of subversion to be persuaded. And to me, that means there's a huge business case for just building practices in digital media and podcasting and building them across causes, building them people who are aligned on certain issues, and to just become the go-to source of information for those issues in an authentic way. So, wow, how many cliches can you pile up at once? But I think if you're at a public affairs firm and you already have a book of business, getting people mentions in the Washington Times or on Fox News or something, there's really no reason not to be booking them on podcasts, because this whole thing that we call media bias is actually like a huge blessing to Republicans, because it means that there are enormous underserved markets that you can't reach on TV. And basically all you have to do is perform at a minimum standard on digital media, and you can build an audience, because like for some reason, Hollywood and New York media executives think that it's morally unpalatable to market to men and conservatives. So the opportunity is wide open if you want to just start today. So right. I don't know if that's the type of answer.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly helpful. I think it's a great space that people should look at. The startup component of that could be, how do you build the platforms or the tools to help people get there?
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't know that I would want to run around this town with a camera and a microphone shooting, 52 different Senate podcasts, but there's got to be an automated way to make that happen.
Well, thanks, Alex, for joining us today. This was a great conversation. You can learn more about him at starspangledgamblers.com and Star Spangled Gamblers, wherever you get your podcasts. Go ahead and give them a subscribe for some fascinating conversations about the world of political gambling. If this episode made you a little bit smarter or gave you something to think about, all that we ask you to do is share it with a friend or colleague, and you look smarter in that process as well. Remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics show wherever you listen to podcasts, and that way you'll never miss an episode. If you prefer, you can also sign up on our website, businessofpoliticspodcast.com, to get email updates and other information about the show. With that, I say thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.